Okay, I'm Mog Morgan, companion of Set and Knights of Shambhala, and this is the Egyptian Magic Podcast. The one I kind of like to talk about is the myth of the Daksha's sacrifice. So it's a myth of a particular sacrifice in India by a person called Daksha, whose name means ritual skill. So it's a kind of symbolic name, if you like. This is like a kind of a grimoire in a way, where the names also, although they're often not translated, tell you quite a lot about what's going on. Ritual skill. He decides to have this great ritual, and this ritual takes place in the sky, in the celestial realm, which again makes you think that the ritual is based on certain astronomical phenomena. If you like, some of the details of the ritual are played out in the movement of the stars and the planets, which again is a very familiar idea from one that could become familiar from the Egyptian tradition, where people talk about the death of gods, or especially the death of Osiris in ancient Egypt, which is linked to the movement of certain stars and constellations, their movement, their disappearance from the sky, and their reappearance at certain other times. So it's almost like the virtual reality version of ancient mythology, or put it like the ancient mythology is interpreting to some extent things that happen in the sky. So that's your as above, as so below type aspect of mythology. So this ritual takes place in the sky. So maybe when we say ritual, we mean it's a sort of a natural process of birth and death and recurring within the sky. But sometimes things happen. Something disrupts that process, or something moves it forward, or that's another important myth was in the Mithraic thing of kind of the representation of the slaying of the bull represents some movement within the zodiac. So he has his great sacrifice, and in this we get the various characters, including his daughter, who's called Sati, which literally means someone mindful or being, someone quite sort of deep who thinks about things or pays attention to things quite deeply, is quite a kind of serious meditator, if you like. There's a famous mantra that I think is related to this, which is Sat Chit Ananda, which stands for being, which is the Sat bit, consciousness, and bliss, which is again the three purposes of all these sort of magic is being, to kind of exist, or manifest, to have good consciousness, and to experience some sort of ecstasy. Unfortunately, her name, because of what happens in the story, as you probably know, her name gives its name to Sati, to practice of widow burning in India, which is in backwards areas maybe. This is always opposed by tantrics who understand these myths quite well. It's for the simple reason is that Sati is a goddess after all, right? And she can do all sorts of things that mortal women or all mortals can't really do. In folklore, in tantric folklore, there are loads and loads of stories. Hopefully I'll get to share some of these with you about this kind of human aspect of getting too carried away, really, with and taking too literally some of these myths, and not realizing that you're observing the gods. Some things that the gods do, such as magic, we can take on as well, but other bits of them, you're kind of asking for trouble if you try and do these things. And quite often in the folklore, it's the gods themselves who turn up when some fanatical devotee is just threatening to go a little bit too far in their devotions, and involving too many extremes. And the gods themselves, including Kali, will turn up and say, "You're going too far. Don't do that. I've had enough. It's okay." And we should listen to that. So from the divine realm in itself, there's also this stream of thought that says, we're doing this stuff, and maybe you won't better do that. Anyway, she's the daughter. Sati is the daughter of Daksha, and for one reason or another, because she becomes the consort or partner of the god Shiva, who's one of the more well-known gods of the Hindu tradition, a very important god within the tantric tradition, one of the main male gods within the tantric tradition, male and female gods as well. He has various consorts, and by reason of his being a master of yoga and meditation, which is one of the things that he is particularly known for, she, being quite a sensible, serious person, as her name implies, is impressed by this and practices her own form of yoga. He's a very psychologically complex god, rather than a kind of obvious projection of human stuff. He's something much more complex. And I'd say, people often compare him to Egyptian god Set. And there is something in that in terms of their kind of energy and all the rest. Anyway, Sati is in this sense the manifestation of the great goddess, which the Hindus call, and Tantrics call, Shakti, the divine power itself. She is very, very devoted, in love with Shiva, who, as I say, is an ascetic resounding on the holy mountain, Mount Kailash. But her father, Daksha, who's supposed to be this great expert on ritual, but I suppose you'd say orthodox ritual, given that point of view, he really doesn't like the tantric tradition. He doesn't really like Shiva. When he gives his great sacrifice in the sky, somehow or other he thinks he can invite, there's always this thing, you always invite all these various divine beings and gods and heroes and all the rest to come and witness your great ritual. But for some reason he decides not to invite Shiva and not to invite his daughter Sati. He wants to insult Shiva, in other words, provoke him, do something diabolical, which again is not an uncommon dynamic within the magical tradition, to kind of insult the gods in order to provoke them to do something in one way or another, whether that's in the story. He doesn't really, Daksha doesn't approve of the alliance between his daughter. Some versions of the story saying this is his incestuous desire for his own daughter. So in a sense, there's a certain criticism here of ancient ideas of incest and all the rest. This is a movement forward from older, sort of less moral traditions. So it's funny that this is the quintessential tantric myth, who are noted for not really abiding by certain rules, but this is one that they obviously, it's implied that they don't much like, because they want people to be kind of in their very own selves, to be sovereign individuals, as being one of the ideas. But it's again, you can't help but note that incest is also a strong driving tradition against it all, whatever, within the Egyptian version, who famously did have these incestuous relationships especially in the royal family, in order to keep the power to within the family, assuming there's power there. Okay, so the tantric sacred sites have a special name called a Pita, or Pitha, if you like. They're always designated shrines of the primal goddess. It just means they've got their own special term, Pitta. Everybody else calls it something else. They call it a Pitta, and it's a seat, and probably a different name. It means a sexual organ. Well, behind the scenes, even though the tantrics are very fond of these sort of double entendres, if you like, for want of a better word, usually called twilight language. Nothing is ever quite as it seems. So there are 4 major such sites within India itself. You can extend that quite a lot, as people tend to do, because it would be obvious why. Well, I should say that as a result of Daksha's insult to Shiva, this was too much for Sati, and the goddess, and she decides to end it all, to kill herself by flinging herself into the sacrificial fire. Right? So, in a sense, she becomes part of the sacrifice. So you can see how a lot of ritual stuff is being encoded here. Essentially, from this, we can learn lots of those inner secret techniques of Tantra. Shiva eventually does turn up, right? Even if you don't invite Shiva, he tends to turn up. The bigger the insult to Shiva, the more likely he is to turn up. And he decides to, I think he probably kills Daksha, or he certainly bashes him up, and he destroys the sacrifice. And that itself has a very interesting. This is probably the reason why the myth comes into existence in the first place, is because at some point, Tantra is very connected with medicine and health and healing, as you would expect, in lots of different ways. And the most important medical system before the Western one that existed in India and still exists, Ayurveda, this is its creation. This is its creation myth as well. This is when Ayurveda is said to have started, mythologically speaking. And what got them going was that there are all these diseases in the world, right? There's this particular moment in time, not prehistory, we're talking about 5th or 6th century before the Common Era. There was this explosion of illnesses, and it required an explanation of what had changed and what could you do about it. So what had changed was that a sacrifice, destruction of a sacrifice, this is a magical idea. If you disrupt the sacrifice, some bad things might happen. And they do. All these diseases come into the world, as well as ways of doing it. And that's another story we'll maybe go into another time. But the key part of this thing is that Sati has also been destroyed. Not destroyed, but she's been killed, and she's in the remains of the sacrifice. And Shiva, you could say, drive Shiva mad, or maybe he's already a little bit deranged, if you like. He takes this mutilated body of his former partner, and he becomes joined to it in some way. He certainly won't let it go. This process cannot go on forever within mythology. It's obviously it's too unstable, and it threatens to kind of upset the cosmic order. That's why it's a celestial event of some sort, perhaps a meteorite, who knows. But certainly something has to be done, as he won't let Sati's body go, and the Shakti's body go. And it is a kind of a corpse after all. And the other gods intervene and dismember the body of Sati. Again, this is another important theme that you find across the ancient magical tradition from east to west, is the process of dismemberment and then reconstitution in some different form. But also, it's very similar in both cases. The Vishnu can't get the body, right, because he's not as powerful as Shiva. He cannot get the body off Shiva, cannot overpower Shiva. All he can do is, with his magical weapons, he can cut the body up without him noticing, so that gradually the corpse becomes dismembered and the parts of it drop into India, different bits of India, and they take root there, and they became that. That's why the temples, the very high-profile temples in India, why they are where they are, right? It's the same with any ritual space. This accounts as well for the existence, and they are, again, that also accounts in some sense to why the Egyptian temples are where they are, the main ones. There's a connection with this idea of across the land. It's obviously a universal idea, and you can find it everywhere. Certain places, certain pieces of the landscape are special in some way and seem to represent parts of our body, especially the sexual parts. So, okay, you find that, just to remind you that in Egyptian temple, the Egyptian temple is envisaged as a human being. In colossal form, lying on their back, actually a goddess. The high-profile Egyptian temples always envisaged as being a naked, presumably female Shakti or goddess lying in some underneath the floor of the temple, or sort of built into it in some ways. Rather surprisingly, as you enter an Egyptian temple, you're entering, when you go through the main entrance, which isn't always open. In fact, there's a special entrance to avoid this being the case. But the main entrance of a temple is opened on certain special days. In a sense, you're entering through the yoni or sexual organs of the goddess, and you're moving into her body in some sense. And you could think of it as being as well a corpse that comes to life in the process of the temple. The two things seem to interact. So that's rather surprising. Maybe these are universals of magic and of the tradition we're talking about. As I say, many temples in Egypt were not designed for you to go through the front door. They might be these days. Indian temples are also envisaged as being a living body. There are diagrams. Maybe I'll show a couple of diagrams. Maybe it looks a bit systematic, but certainly the floor plan of an Indian temple is envisaged as being the body, either in one of the famous yoga poses or just lying flat, face up. And in fact, the central holy of holies in every Hindu temple, tantric temple, is called the womb. So it's not like the doorway is the womb, but the central point, the bindu, as sometimes is called, the point of creation within a temple, and within our own bodies is this womb-like structure. Often in the center, as well known, as was rather shocking at first to a lot of Westerners, at the center of the temple, the Hindu temple, is this, people only notice firstly what looks like a phallic image. bit truncated or whatever. There's a phallic image, but actually it isn't. It is a phallic image, but there's a bit more to it. It's actually the lingam and yoni image. It's a lingam, which is the Hindi name for the phallus, or a sign. It also means a sign of the male principle, I guess. But it is always accompanied by a triangle or triangular structure, a structure of some sort that represents the yoni of the goddess. So the two things are connected. Now, the most obvious idea is sort of representing some sort of sexual intercourse, a sort of phallus in the yoni type thing. But in fact, esoteric tradition would say that, contrary to what you might think, it's not only simulating sexual intercourse. You can't completely avoid that suggestion. It's so obvious. But more than that, there's a kind of secret of body magic here, which is that the yoni of the Shakti, or the goddess, is actually manifesting the lingam, the phallus. That's why if you look at it, it doesn't look quite realistic as you might expect, right? It's something being manifested, a power or a sign being manifested from the yoni. So it's within this left-hand path tantric goddess tradition, the yoni is I don't know, maybe more important than anything else. Certainly they have all of these representations of it, but I wouldn't commit completely to that, because obviously there's a second tradition where the number of phallic images and the worship of the phallus, and a number of mythologies that stories that allude to that. So, but in this particular instance, let's say, so bear in mind, the yoni manifests the phallus, right, or the lingam in the Hindi. And you can't help but be reminded, if you think about it, of the myth of Osiris and Isis. The myth of Isis and Osiris was also known within India, but that's another story. Specifically under that story, he is, of course, dismembered as well as Sati was, into many pieces, 14 or various multiples scattered across Egypt, each one of which gives rise to a special holy site. But this could be India. There's a 15th piece, which is the lingam itself. And people talk about it, the mystery of the number 15. The number 15, very, very important symbolic number within the tantric tradition. The 15th day, the goddess 15. There are all sorts of ramifications of this. And the 15th piece is the missing phallus of Osiris, and it's interesting that Isis has to manifest it for him. People say she created it or found it or what. She certainly couldn't find it. She has to create it in some way. In other words, she has the goddess, the primal goddess that in this case Isis represents, the Shakti. She manifests this energy, this lingam energy, if you like, in lots of different ways. Tantra kind of reenacts certain aspects of this. And that is a remarkable parallel to what you find in Hindu Tantra, where the yoni of the Shakti manifests the lingam as a magical object, as a source of power and life within society. That's fascinating in its own way. As I say, the origin of the pilgrimage sites is a matter of legend that we've talked about. Probably that's enough that's quite a lot of quite complicated ideas to be going on with. I just wanted to summarize that. We'll probably come back to it a little bit later when we talk about the nature of the sites and some of the things that are done. But the underlying thing in all of these stories that I wanted to draw attention to at this stage is that they're all, in some sense, a meditation upon death, and especially a meditation on the corpse. And in the little piece that I read right at the beginning, which I won't read again, but just to remind you of the key points, that the tantric adept that she talked to is talking about this ritual, which involved meditation on a corpse, but the corpse, the bit they miss out, is the corpse of the goddess, who is face down in this particular case, in front of the tantric adept in this, what is potentially quite scary ritual. There are scary versions of this ritual, and then there are kind of more sensual versions of it. You never know which is which they're referring to, because tantrics tend to kind of like this ambiguity of language. In the tradition I come from, we tend to look at these things as bodily secrets, as in one way or another. That in a sense we're always talking about something that is dormant, dead, if you like, an energy, a bodily energy that is dormant in some way, that is at rest, that given certain mental ideas and certain physical practices, just the will to do it, then that can be brought back to life, as in the ritual, where the way they express it is that the body of the female face down in front of the adept, or maybe he's even on top of her, sitting on top of her. That seems less likely to me. I think sitting close to her, performing this ritual that we know from all over the world of installing things into the body, and the use of mantras and magical signs and all the rest to somehow activate the body again, to bring it back to life, to a creative position, so that it becomes a representation of the goddess Kali. And in that circumstances, if you survive to that point, where I say not to be too dramatic, obviously some of the ways that we do this is not in this necessarily this amazingly insanity inducing way, but other ways of doing it, that it becomes obvious that something has happened, right? That the body, even if it's a living person, normally we're talking about people doing it with a living partner, even if or whatever, or some sort of representation, symbolic image of something dead that you're going to bring back to life again, as in the corpse of Osiris, the corpse of the goddess, or whatever. It gives some indication that it has revived in some way, at which point you can do the usual things of asking what the name is, to confirm that you are actually in the presence of the Shakti, and they should have the appropriate names, which are kind of known to people and way of communication. And one can ask for whatever it is that you want. You might not get it, but you certainly should be prepared. You wouldn't go through all this unless it's something you want. Be no point, one way or another. It's an act of devotion. There you go. So that's the first look at Egyptian elements, or Egyptian parallels, if you like, or even whether the same system, but specifically within the Indian tradition, within Hindu Tantra. So thanks for listening. I'll come back next time with a little bit more, hopefully, details on that. If you are interested to know about the physical connection, trade between South India and the Red Sea and India and all these other places, then I actually got a little book called Isis Goddess in India, which deals with a lot of the different things, some of the themes that we've just talked about. And that is a specialist book, but I still think you might find it interesting, of this stream of tradition connection between both places in the ancient world, that you might be surprised by. So please check that. And that's it for now, Senepti, and well, Om Mani Padme Hum. The jewel is in the lotus, as they say.